Okay, there we go. We're recording, so other folks can watch this video later. So here we go. Let's see, where are we? This is our last class meeting for the semester. So we won't get all sentimental because I think I have all of you for classes or a class next semester. Now that class will be it's fully asynchronous, meaning there are no meetings like this scheduled for that class, and you have the whole 16-week semester to get that done. Um, Now, for that class, if you would like to have some meetings, we can schedule some, but it's not really designed to have meetings like that. But I wanted to make sure that with your first semester in the program, and this being a shortened semester of only about 10 weeks, that we're kind of meeting regularly, so you could get that extra support. And next semester, hopefully, everything's familiar with to you, and you shouldn't need too much extra for that. Um, what are we doing? Uh, let's see. Next week, you have your final exam, and we're going to talk about that tonight. I just opened up the study guide for that before class. We'll look at that tonight. Um, so before we get to that, we're going to talk about rubrics. Last week we talked about performance assessments. So we'll get into that as well. So we'll talk about performance assessments, rubrics, and then we'll get into the final exam and study guide towards the end of class. Couple just housekeeping issues. First, make sure your key assessment is due tonight. I think about a third of those have already been submitted. You need to submit that to the Dropbox for this week's module. You also need to submit that to Anthology. So Anthology is kind of a repository, and for each class that you take here at the University of North Georgia, you will have a key assessment. The key assessment will go into Anthology, and that's kind of um, like our milestones, or that's our major assessments that basically we have to report to the state how our students do on these projects, and we kind of track them and we have that data over time. So those projects have to be an anthology. Now I'll grade it just like I grade all the other ones. I'll download your submission. I'll put feedback on there. You'll see a rubric. I will put that into D2L. But the administrators need that key assessment in Anthology so that they can compile that data and do analysis on it over time to see how students are doing, whether we have to make improvements to the program, things like that. So anyways, that needs to go into Anthology as well. Um, let's see. In terms of those key assessments, they take me more than an hour to grade each. So I will not have those graded by tomorrow or Friday. I will probably be finishing those up next Wednesday about the time that you are taking your final exam. So, with 18 students in the class, I have to carve out 18 hours between now and next week in order to get all those graded. So you can look for those maybe, hopefully by Tuesday. Hopefully, I'm not still grading them when you're taking your final exam, but it's going to be Tuesday, maybe Wednesday before I'm done with those and get the feedback back to you. Let's see. Any questions?
Dr. Cuevas, it may help everybody because we are so new to anthology. One little wrinkle is we have to pick you, Joshua Cuevas, as the assessor
Yes.
in order to successfully submit it to anthology. And I know that was confusing for some of us a week ago when we were uploading our strategies coursework to the anthology. I just thought I'd add that.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you for that input. So the folks that when you submit something to an anthology, it sends me an email. So it seems like the folks who have already submitted their key assessment to D2L, which is where I need it and I grade it. It seems like you guys have also successfully submitted to anthology. Yeah, but that clarification is good, and I'm not always familiar with that because my view in anthology is different from your view. So sometimes students have some questions about it, and I don't know exactly what it looks like from your view when you're submitting it. I just kind of see it from my view. So, um, all right, let's see. All right, let's get into tonight's content, which is performance assessments. So last week we discussed performance assessments and how they are different from the more objective types of items that you've been creating thus far this semester for exit tickets and for quizzes and for tests. That's where you're going to have your multiple choice questions, your short answer questions, things like that. So we started getting into what a performance assessment is, and we did a little brainstorming. We had two lists of we had performance assessments that were true performances, like debates, speeches, things like that, presentations, and then we had other performance assessments that provide you with documentation, and those might be papers. Anything in writing, lab projects, things like that. And with those, the true performances like the speeches, debates, I recommend that those are used for minor grades because they are less reliable and the validity is sometimes questionable on those. Whereas the ones that have documentation, you can always look at those again. You can compare that to the rubric over time. Um, you can, if you have to meet with a parent or an administrator over that grade, you can show that documentation to them. So that's where you're going to have your major grades, besides from like benchmark tests and things like that. Um, so you need to think about like there's room for both of them, both types, but you do need to think about how you want to kind of mix them throughout the semester, where you want to place them. Um, but performance assessments they're pretty. It's important to have some of those throughout the semester. Major projects and things like that. Um, so, what are based on what we talked about last week? Um, what are some of the limitations of performance assessments? They allow students, obviously, to be very get involved with it, active learning. They're developing skills. They're working on these things. But what are some weaknesses of them? Or is it just all strengths?
Is it that they're a little harder to assess sometimes? It's not as straightforward or fast to grade as something like a standard.
Yeah, you actually hit on two of them with that answer. They're harder to assess because they are more subjective, right? With a test question, it should have one clear answer. It should be more objective. Performance assessments are more subjective. That's going to make them harder to grade. That will also mean that their validity and reliability is probably going to be lower. Hopefully, the validity is strong, but their reliability is always going to be a little bit lower because of that subjectivity. And the second thing that you pointed out was the time that it takes. So a performance assessment should take students a lot of time. It might be a 3 day project. It could be a 2 week project. It could be nearly a semester long project. It should take them a lot of time. That's a major grade. But on the flip side, it's also going to take you a long time to grade. So, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, what you turn in today, that key assessment, now that is a performance assessment. The final exam that you take next week is a test. But that performance assessment that you turn in today, as I said, it's going to take me an hour, sometimes an hour and a half to grade each one. When you turn in your final exam next week, it will not take me an hour and a half to grade each one. Each one of those final exams, I'll be able to grade in probably uh, less than 15 minutes. Um, but these performance assessments, they're very time consuming to grade. So you need to work that into your curriculum map. You don't want to have a major performance assessment due right before the end of the semester when you only have 2 days to grade it, and then you need to have your grades in. That doesn't make sense. You're not going to be able to grade performance assessments in 2 days before you have to submit grades. You need to give yourself a week or 2 weeks to grade these major performance assessments. So that needs to be taken into account. That's also why you don't want to have a performance assessment for a major grade that students complete in one class period. It doesn't, that's more of an activity sort of thing. That's a minor grade. It doesn't make sense for students only to put in one class period's worth of work, but yet on your end, you're having to grade it for a week, hours and hours like that. You need to, it needs to be kind of proportional. If you're going to spend a lot of time sifting through it and grading them, then students should also have put in a good bit of work and effort into compiling that. So these are just things to think about when you're thinking about what sorts of performance assessments to have in your class and how to span them out across the semester. Um, all right. So next, I have a little task for y'all. So let me share my screen real quick. I'm going to show you where this is. I'm going to have you guys, let's see, where is that? Let's see here. This is, let's go to, can you see the D2L page on your screen?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. So if I'm going to ask you to go to Module 9, and you're in Module 9, that's tonight. I just opened up these resources. Okay. What you'll find here, you'll see Sophia's fourth grade essay and rubric. Sophia is my daughter. She's the one who's now about to be a sophomore at UGA. What you'll find here is one of her papers from fourth grade, and you'll find a rubric. It's a short paper. Let's see. Can you see that now? Can you see the paper? Or do you still see D2L?
And we can see the paper, at least I can.
Okay. Yeah. So this is the paper. So what I'm going to ask you to do, take about 5 minutes, read through this paper. It's, it shouldn't take, it's, 3 pages or so. So I want you to read through the paper, kind of make mental notes. Now consider this is a fourth grader. Now I know most of you will be teaching high school, but try to think about the developmental level of a fourth grader. Um, so, anyways, you're going to read through this, take some mental notes. We're going to talk about the quality of it, and then we're going to look at the rubric. Don't consider the rubric yet, but read through it. Think about how you would assess this paper, and this is a performance assessment because it's a paper. And then we'll talk about it, and then we'll look at the rubric and the grade. So, if you would, everybody go to that right now and read through it. I'll give you about 5 minutes. And I'll be here. I'm just going to turn my camera off for this moment. Or maybe I won't.
Yeah, I think Sophia deserved a little bit better than an 80.
I'm having trouble finding this video or this.
Richard, it's in module number 9. If you look under resources where the readings normally are, that's where it is.
Did she get a 16 out of 20? Was that it?
Yeah, Shay.
Okay, I see it. I just didn't go past the rubric.
All right. Hopefully, everybody has gotten a chance to get through this. Let's get some feedback, some observations on this paper.
That the teacher was a little critical of a fourth grader.
Well, let's not talk about the grade yet. Let's talk about the paper.
I had mostly correct spelling. Most of it was generally understandable. The ideas, probably for a fourth grader, are pretty organized.
She had good structure, I noticed. Like each paragraph had a distinctive point that she was trying to make.
Yeah,
I,
and
oh,
I'm
sorry, coach.
okay. Yeah, I think that she it also looked like in her points, as somebody just mentioned, that she had reasons for her thoughts. So she made statements and then she defended them individually, which was like the bulk, that middle part of the paper.
Yeah, coach, I agree. And also, it was like she had a thesis statement and then she backed it up with argumentative essay. So she even at one point talked about some study in there. Of course, she didn't have references. She's a fourth grader, but she backs each point up.
Yeah, her mom and I were like, when we read this, we're like, what study have you been reading? And she said, her teacher just told her not to worry about it. Just make something up. And I'm like, no, that's not how it works. But yeah, she apparently was reading some research studies on this or something. But okay, so basically, we've got, you guys have given lots of good observations. This is a 5 paragraph essay. The sentences are complete in mostly throughout the paper. Each paragraph, particularly the body paragraphs, focuses on a different idea. There's support within that. There are examples. There are some misspellings, but if you notice, it's even some of the more complex words tend to be spelled correctly. Socialize, there's and you're
Favorable,
excuse me,
favorable. That was like
favorable,
one that stuck.
accomplished.
Yeah.
So you're gonna have some misspellings, even in obviously in high school kids papers, but the spelling is pretty good. But mainly the what we call the controlling idea, which is kind of like a thesis. It's consistent throughout the paper. Everything makes sense. Is logically sequenced. And I used to work at the educational research lab at UGA, assessing the high school graduation test essays, the 8th grade essays, and the 5th grade essays. And I can tell you definitively this paper would pass the 8th grade writing test, and it might surprise you, it would pass the graduation test requirements at the time. Because of all the things that we just mentioned. It wouldn't get a high score on the graduation test, but also keep in mind the graduation test, students generally have to be able to do math and write at about a 8th or 9th grade level, because it is not a college entrance exam. It's just to make sure students have mastered the basic literacy and math to complete high school for adulthood. So I think we should all agree that this is a pretty good paper for a 4th grader, right?
And yeah, and as a former draftsman for doing property surveys, her letters are really good.
Yeah. So it looks pretty good, right? So now let's go up and look at the rubric and how this was graded. And as I think John pointed out earlier, what's the grade on this?
An 80.
Mhm.
A what?
An 80.
80. Yep. 16 out of 20. Take 16, divide by 20, that gives you 80%. Now, 80% is a low B, almost a C, right? So, does anybody see any issues with that, considering the quality of the paper?
The main issue, it looks like to me, is that rubric is not the right rubric that they should be using. It's too strict a rubric.
Okay. And that's what we're going to be looking at tonight is rubrics. But okay, so there are we haven't gotten into this in this course. There are different types of validity, and there are different types of reliability. If you look at this, it lacks what we would call face validity. You don't have to have a PhD to know that score, an 80, low B, doesn't match the quality of the student's work, right? So on the face of it, it doesn't match up. It doesn't seem to be valid. Because if it was, then like, wow, what 4th grader is getting an A? Like what are they writing that would give them an A that would be so much better in quality than this paper? So the this this rubric is problematic because it was not able to accurately capture and portray the student's performance on this performance assessment. The grade is simply not accurate, and I didn't raise a fuss with this teacher at the time because I knew she was going to get an A in her 4th grade ELA class, that wasn't going to be an issue. But this is, I use this as an example. Many of the rubrics that are used in schools look just like this, which is a problem because that means that there's a good chance they are leading to inaccurate grades. If they're leading to inaccurate grades, that means your grades aren't valid, and that can negatively impact students, particularly in high school when they're getting ready to try to get into college. And if you're putting grades on their papers that are not accurate, then you're not really fulfilling your responsibility as a teacher. So we need to think about how we can construct rubrics to provide more accurate grades. This one is clearly, it's just not, this paper is for a fourth grader should not be a high C/low B level, right? So what we need to do is think about how we can construct better rubrics. So I'm going to stop sharing this and I'm going to share another rubric instead. And what I would like before we get to that, let's talk about one concept. I said there are different types of validity, and we said that grade lacked face validity. You can easily look at it on the face of it and tell that the grade and scoring did not match the student's performance. Now, for reliability, a certain type of reliability goes along with performance assessments. That is called inter-rater reliability. So somebody take a guess, take a wild stab at it. What is inter-rater reliability? It is also used in research, like published research. If somebody does a research study that has to do with assessing students' work, that performance assessments, things like that, they need to report on their inter-rater reliability. What do you think that means?
Is that basically the general consensus among observers or people who are like looking at it that are assessing the same thing?
Yes. Yeah, that's pretty much exactly what it is. So it results in a number. Like it's a calculation. We're not going to get into the calculation tonight. It's the concept of inter-rater reliability. It should be important to you as teachers. So if inter-rater reliability is if two teachers were to grade the same paper using the same rubric, will they come up with the same score? Okay. What would you expect? What would you want in that scenario?
You would probably want somebody to fall into the 80, 90 percentile in terms of achieving the same score.
Yeah, you want high inter-rater reliability. And so when you have standardized tests that deal with open-ended responses, like essays and things like that, like the graduation test essays, the GRE graduate records exam used to have an essay portion. Those will always be assessed by more than one person. And so then they run the statistics to see if one person's grade was the same as the other person's grade. If it's not, if there's low inter-rater reliability and they are very far off from one another, then it usually goes to a third rater, and whichever two agree the most, that's the score that they go with. But inter-rater reliability has to do with if two teachers or two raters grade the same paper, will they come up with the same score? Now, you want them to come up with the same score, right? Yeah, thanks. Charkita put it in the chat how to actually spell inter-rater reliability. So it's can anybody think of why it might be problematic if there was low inter-rater reliability?
I mean, I
Because
think. Go ahead, Shay.
I'm just thinking grades won't be valid.
Yeah, there's a question of if you have one teacher saying one thing, one teacher saying another thing in terms of the grade, which one is right, right? It's also confusing to the student. If one teacher would grade it as a 95 and the other teacher is grading it as a 70, well, what did they get right? What did they get wrong? Like how is it's confusing as far as the feedback um and now keep in mind it has to be teachers in the same content area, right? It has to be two ELA teachers grading an ELA paper or two history teachers grading a history project. It doesn't work if one is a biology teacher and one is say ELA teacher and they're grading a history project. They have to the teachers grading it have to have the same background knowledge. But if there's low inter-rater reliability, that tells you that there's a problem there. The grades are likely not accurate. Okay, so it could be a problem with the raters. It could be a problem with the rubric. So you will probably never get to a point in your career when you are having two teachers grade the same work. Now, there might be situations where you're asked to do that for some sort of district benchmarks that are open-ended or something like that. Um, but anytime you create a rubric, you need to have in the back of your mind inter-rater reliability. So when you create a rubric, you need to think about if I gave this rubric to the teacher next door who teaches the same classes as me, if they use this rubric and graded the same papers, would they come up with the same scores, the same grades for those papers? Okay, now if it's unlikely that they would come out to the exact same score. Like if you gave a paper a 92, they're probably not going to also come up with a 92 exactly. But ideally, within a letter grade. It's within 10 points. So if you gave it a 92, hopefully they gave it either, somewhere between a 93, 94, or maybe an 89, 88. So within about 5 points on either side, then you're probably okay. Then you're probably you both probably have a similar view of the paper, and you can be fairly confident that the grades you're giving are accurate. Okay, so we'll come back to this concept in a few minutes. But inter-rater reliability, that is important when you think about rubrics, creating them and using them. Does anybody have any questions about inter-rater reliability?
I do, Professor Cuevas,
Okay.
and you can. It's okay if you tell me. We'll talk about that in another class going forward. But
Mhm.
I guess my thought was, what about? I feel like I've seen inter-rater unreliability when it's my students who are in the gen ed class for my history course. And so I'm thinking like along the aspects when we have like some of our babies who are in predominantly in the special education department for their core classes. And then like when I see as we're trying to transition them in like into like a co-taught class, I feel like that is where I've seen it. But I guess from your understanding, you're saying that particular teacher is more of a special education teacher and that's their specialty. And I would be looking at it from a history standpoint. Is that correct?
Yeah, but any sort of unreliability between raters is a bad thing, because that means that somebody's not giving accurate grades. So and when I taught high school and I had co-teachers, there was a time when I was working on a rubric and I graded all the papers for a class, and then I gave those papers to my co-teacher and asked her to grade them using the same rubric. Now I had made markings on the paper, like feedback, like I do on your papers, but the grade was not on the paper. The grade was on my rubric. And I gave those same papers that were marked up, and she went through them um, using that same rubric, and she came out to very nearly the same grades that I gave. So that made me feel good in terms of, okay, we're on the same page in terms of our expectations. and we're grading these papers similarly. Now, when you don't have inter-rater reliability, that would be a problem because somebody's not grading it accurately.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so next, what I would like to do is I have another rubric that I would like to share with you. This one is in Module 9. So this is it's labeled as Math Rubric. You can look at, you should be able to see it on my screen, yes?
Yes.
Yes. So that's in the same place where Sophia's essay was. I don't think we have any math teachers in this class. Um, the math content is not what we're thinking about, although we do want to think about the math in the rubric. Okay. So because a rubric is going to generate a grade, the math is what we're going to be focusing on for this portion. But in terms of you know, what I'd like you to do is take just a couple minutes, look through this rubric. This is one I simply found online. I kind of randomly looked up rubrics online. I found it. So take a few minutes and kind of evaluate it. Look at it. Look for strengths, weaknesses, problems that you might see with it. I'm going to give you about 5 minutes, and maybe if you want to jot down and brainstorm some of what you think, but go ahead and take a minute and look at this and see what you think about the quality of this rubric. Okay, let's get some feedback on this. What do you think about this rubric? Are there strengths, weaknesses, anything that jumps out at you?
It's a much stronger rubric than the last one because it has, you know, more stringent criteria as far as, okay, do they understand these general concepts? Is it organized in this general way instead of hey, I've numerically looked at this, and that's what I see.
Okay. What other ideas do we have about this rubric?
I think you would probably have low inter-rater reliability just based on the fact that some of the items on there are a little vague.
Okay. That's one of the things that a lot of people say about this rubric is that the items are vague. And I think, yes, that is correct. One thing, though, is you don't want to paint yourself into a corner. So some people create rubrics that are like 9 pages long. That's generally not a good thing because what will happen is they'll try to put everything they can possibly think of into each box in the rubric. Well, I can guarantee you there will be students each time that you have an assignment who will submit something that you were not expecting. And if you make your rubric so detailed and that like you think you've laid out everything that could possibly happen, well, a student is always going to surprise you, and then it's not in your rubric. You can't fit it in there, so you're left with a quandary of how to grade it. So there will always be some subjectivity to grading performance assessments, but you want to lessen that subjectivity, right? So you should have enough information in the rubric for students to know what they need to do, but there also needs to be some space for you to use your professional judgment because you are the teacher, you're the expert in the room. So there needs to be a little bit of room there for you to exercise your professional judgment. But I would agree that this rubric it's pretty vague in a lot of places. And I would say that this would lead to low inter-rater reliability, and I'm going to show you why in a minute. But does anybody see any other issues potentially with this? Anything you jotted down while you looked at it?
Redundancy in wording,
Okay. What do you mean?
some correct answers. Excuse me. Yeah, some correct answers or a few correct answers. Doesn't really clarify the performance expectations.
Okay.
That could mean anything.
For
But
being a math rubric, it isn't really as quantifiable as you think.
well, let me show you one issue here. There are some unlike things in the category. So if we're going to call this category main concepts, this category organization, this one terms and symbols, and this one analysis. Um, Organized and correct answers, those are two very different things. Something can be organized but have incorrect answers, or it could have correct answers but yet not be organized. So that's not a good plan to put those two things together, right? Because they're very unalike. So how do you grade something if it is organized but has incorrect answers or vice versa? But also notice here it says answers are correct, right? And down here, it has considerable accuracy. In math, can you have something that is correct but inaccurate? Or could you have something that is accurate but incorrect? I would argue
Yeah.
no.
No,
No,
contradiction in terms.
right? So basically, it's grading the same thing in two different categories. You don't want to do that. Basically, so if a kid had incorrect answers and fell down here, well, they're also going to fall. They're also going to get points taken off down here for having inaccurate answers, right? So you're hitting them in two different areas for the same thing. Don't do that. So the way the concepts are constructed in this rubric, it's problematic. Okay. Um, Now let's start thinking about the math. This is kind of the important part. If someone got fours all the way down, a student got fours all the way down in each category, right? What score would they get? They got a 4 in each category. What was their score?
16.
Huh?
16.
100%.
Yes, 16 out of 16. That's 100%, right? That's 100%. What if they got threes all the way down? Threes in each category.
Is that 80%?
No. Well,
75.
folks, this is
75.
huh?
75.
75. Yeah, this is easy math, folks. 3 out of 4 is 75, right? And what if they got twos all the way down?
50.
50. Right, exactly. So what we need to think about is the words, the descriptions, does that match the grade, right? Because that's going to tell us whether the grade is valid or not. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing this for a minute and I'm going to read some of the descriptions to you. You're not going to be able to look at it. Usually in class, I tell students to close their eyes, but you can't see this now, okay? But I'm going to read you some descriptions. You're going to tell me what you think the numerical grade should be, or the letter grade. Does this, think about it in terms of letter grade. Does this sound like an A? Does it sound like a B, C, D, or F? Okay, so I'm going to read you this description. Demonstrates an understanding of the main concepts. Organized and most answers are correct. Mathematical terms and symbols are used appropriately. Analysis of the problem is evident with considerable accuracy. What letter grade does that sound like to you?
I would say B, just off the top of my head.
Okay. What else? What other ideas? Let's get some other folks.
I would have said A.
A,
I would have said A, but it's probably a B.
A, B. So everybody thus far has said A or B. That was the column for 3. You gave, if you're using this rubric, you gave that student a 75. Anybody see a problem there?
Yeah. It's not matching what the rubric is not matching what we're asking for.
Right. The words don't match the math.
Yes.
So the description it doesn't seem to describe a C level paper. And 75 is not a high C even, right? That's in some districts, a D is 70 to 74. So that's almost a D in that district, right? But the words did, right? The math is not mathing. The words did not describe, the words seem to describe a B, maybe B plus, maybe even an A. But those words did not sound like a C level paper. All right. Now I'm going to do another one. You tell me what this seems to describe. Okay. Demonstrates a partial understanding of the main concepts. Organization needs to improve with some correct answers. Some mathematical terms and symbols are used correctly. Analyzes the problem with some success. Accuracy needs to improve. What does that sound like to you?
C.
I would
See?
say I would say the 2.
Now, I'm not asking for
Sorry,
I'm saying letter grade.
got you. C.
What does it sound like to you based on the words?
B.
A B?
C is in cat. C.
C. So we have 2 votes for C. What does it sound like? Anybody else?
C sounds reasonable to me.
C. Sounded like a C as well, to me, sounded like there was some mastery there, but not full mastery, needed to improve a little bit. But that column, that was from the 2 column. And if students got a 2 all the way down, what grade did they get?
50%.
50. So if you're using that rubric, you just failed that student. Seeing a problem there? That would be a problem.
Yeah, that's a huge problem.
Yeah. So because there is no level in education where 50% is anything but failing badly. Whether you're in from elementary school up to high school, college, graduate level, if a student gets a 50, that is failing badly. Yet the words, the language in the rubric does not suggest failing badly. It suggests like C-level work. So that is an issue. Okay. The grades that you would give based on that rubric would not be valid. They would not be accurate. You'd be putting the wrong grades into the grade book for that student's work. Okay. So these are the things you need to think about when you are when you're creating a rubric and when you're using it. Okay. Now let's look at the inter-rater reliability. Now, one of the things, so let me share that again for just a moment. So one of the things you need to think about is the words in the columns, but also the numbers across the top. This is the most common sort of rubric that you'll see, 4, 3, 2, 1 across the top. I will assert that this is not a good scoring system if you're grading students. It is just not a good mathematically. This is a very poor scoring system, and you should be starting to see why it can be problematic. Now we're going to look at why how this will pan out in terms of inter-rater reliability. So for that, I'm going to pull out the whiteboard. Okay. Can y'all see that okay?
Yes.
Okay. So here we go. Basically the same rubric. We have the categories here, the same, and 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's say you have one teacher who's going to be grading in red here. The teacher there's a paper, right? And this teacher thought that in each category the paper was pretty strong. It's not perfect, but it's pretty strong. So this teacher says, yeah, well, in each category, because sometimes you'll have a low 4 and sometimes you'll have a high 4. Well, this teacher thinks it was just barely a 4 in each category. It got above the 3 level, but it was just barely a 4. Okay. Now you have another teacher represented by the purple marker. This teacher sees and grades the same paper. And this teacher says, yeah, it was very good in each category all the way through, right? Except this teacher said this was actually a high 3 in each category. In each category, it didn't quite get up to a 4. So they're basically their grades are just on one side of the line or the other. Now, they had a very similar view of this paper. They both thought it was strong in each category. All the way down the line, is just their grades fell on one side of the line or the other. What grade did the teacher with red, what grade did they give the paper? What's the score for the red?
100.
100. What grade did the purple teacher give?
75.
75. What do we think about that inter-rater reliability?
Not good.
Not good.
That's not good. That's more than 2 letter grades off. That's 25% off between here and here. So one teacher, because of the way this rubric is formulated, one teacher gave it a score of 100, a perfect score. The other teacher gave it a score of 75, which is a mid-level C at best. Are you seeing a problem here?
Yes.
Yeah, that's really problematic in terms of inter-rater reliability. I think it was Stephen a minute ago who pointed out that that math rubric would lead to poor inter-rater reliability, and this is why it's leading to poor inter-rater reliability. There's too much of a gap, okay? Another issue with this type of rubric, fully 50% of this rubric describes failing work. This is passing, but anything in this column, 2 out of 4, that's failing. So then I have to ask the teacher, why do you have to describe failing work in this column and then describe extra failing work? Why is that necessary? Like here I'm gonna in these boxes, I'm gonna describe crappy work that leads to a failing grade. But wait, let me now describe extra crappy work that leads to an even lower grade. Is that necessary?
No, because failing is failing.
Failing is failing. You only need one column that describes failing work. You don't need multiple columns that describe failing work. So basically, and this rubric is not, this 4321 rubric is not good for classroom grading, because as teachers, we don't really need to be able to discern, differentiate between the students who are down here between a 50 and a 25. We need to see who is the difference between a B minus and an A, and maybe, I'm sorry, a B plus and an A, or maybe the difference between a B minus and a C plus. Those are the types of distinctions that you need to make as a teacher. These distinctions down here, like once a student is failing, it gets to a failing grade on something, they're going to need remediation. They're not mastering enough. So these distinctions down here are unimportant for a teacher. We need to be able to slice it up and see those distinctions at the top end of the scale, not at the bottom end of the scale. So this 4321, that does not work. I would advise you that you should not be using this sort of rubric to grade students in a classroom on any sort of performance assessment. Doesn't matter what type of performance assessment, whether it's a paper or project, speech, debate. This is just a poor type of rubric, poor scoring system to use. Now, they do use it for standardized tests, because on standardized tests, they're not getting a letter grade. They're just basically getting pass fail, right? So given what we have just covered, how do you think we can solve this problem of inter-rater reliability? And say we're going to keep a rubric with the same type of boxes. How can we solve this problem? Hopefully you've recognized by now that this sort of rubric leads to low inter-rater reliability and all kinds of issues as far as the validity and accuracy of the grades that you would give with this sort of rubric. So what do you think we can do?
Well, you could take 2 and make that essentially the 3 category, where 2 is your 70 to 79 grade, 3 would be your 80 to 89, 4 would be your A, and then 1 would be everything failing.
Yes. So let's get rid of these numbers across the top. And what I would suggest would be, think of it in terms of letter grades. This would be A, this would be B, this would be C to D, and this would be F, right? So now you only have one category for failing work. That's it. but now you're distinguishing on the high end of the scale, right? But what we have to do now is, so basically, now you think we've got our letter grades up here, right? So now what you're going to do is when you fill in the words should correspond to the letter grade. You're going to use words in each of these that suggest, okay, this is what A level work is, and this is what B level work is, and here's what C or D level work is, and here's what F level work is, okay? So now it's going to start to come together, except that we still need to make the math has to work, right? So the easiest way to do that is to use categories worth 10 points. So let's say, and now this might be a minor category because I'll show you how to do the math if it's a major category. All right, so let's take a minor category. We'll call organization. Maybe that's the less important, right? So what we're going to do is here, that's worth 10 to 9 points. Here, this is worth 8 points. Here, it's worth 7 to 6 points. And here, it's worth 5 to 0 points, right? Because if it's a 10-point category, 10 is perfect score, 10 out of 10. That's 100%. But 9 out of 10 is also an A. That's 90%. 8 out of 10 is a B. That's 80%. 7 out of 10 is 70% to 60%. And 5 out of 10 is 50% to 0. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Now, what if you have a category that's more important? That's maybe you want to weight more. What would you do? Let's say main concepts. That's a big category. You want that to be worth more than organization.
So you would use more weigh that one more heavily. So instead of just the 9 and 10, would it be like the 8 to 10?
Wouldn't be 8 to 10. 8 to 10 would be 80%. But how would you weight it more? But mathematically, what would you do to weight it more heavily?
Well, it needs more points.
So what would be a good point structure to use? And Morgan says base it out of 20. And that's exactly what I would recommend. Basically, just double it, right? So here you have 20 to 18. You have 17 to 16. You have 15 to 12. And you have 11 to 0, right?
Got it.
And
Yeah.
now it's worth more, but
Right.
it still falls within the A. So 18 out of 20 is 90%. Or you could give a 19 out of 20, which is 95%. Okay, 16 out of 20 is 80%. 17 out of 20 is 85%. Now it goes in 5% increments, okay? But each one corresponds with the letter grade. So everything in this column is going to be within 80 to 90%. Everything in this column is going to be 90% to 100%. Okay, this will also
because you doubled it and because you, oh, I see what you're saying. All right, because I was looking at it overall, but we're talking about like the main concept now is weighted heavily. It's out of 20 and organization is out of 10. Is that correct?
Right. Yeah, don't worry about it. It doesn't matter whether the rubric adds up to 60 points overall or 70 points overall, because you're just taking a percentage, right? But now you have a more heavily graded one or heavily weighted one up here, but it still falls into the category of, but this will also lead to higher inter-rater reliability because now if one teacher grades it 18 out of 20 and one teacher grades at 17 out of 20, they're much closer. You're not 25% off, you're only 5% off in that category. Okay. So this is going to yield higher inter-rater reliability where the teachers are more likely to come up with the same grade and the same score. Okay. I would recommend that you only use categories of 10 or 20, nothing else. Nothing else. Why? Why do you think I say that? Only categories of 10 or 20.
It's just easier to do the math.
It's easy to do the math in your head, and that's important when you're grading, right? So everybody knows 8 out of 10. What is that? It's 80%, right?
80%.
The 20 is a little bit harder, but like I've got that in my head, but you should be able to know 17 out of 20, that's 85%. 15 out of 20, that's 75%. So that's pretty easy, right? You can do that math in your head. I would argue that if you actually have to take a calculator out, that's probably not a good thing, because then you're probably not going to be grading as accurately. That's why you don't want to use like a category worth like 15 points, right? Because if it's 15 to what? Is it 15 to 14 or 15 to 13? Well, now I have to get the calculator out to figure out, is it to for it to be an A, is a 14 an A or is a 13 an A? I don't know. I got to get the calculator out. But let's say a 14 is an A. Okay, 13 is a B, is it? And what about to 12? I don't know. Don't do that to yourself. Once you start getting into things that are hard to conceptualize, you're gonna be grading. The accuracy of your grading is gonna go down. So don't use categories worth 15 points total. Don't do that. Use 10s and 20s. Now, however, think about this. Categories worth 50 points. That's pretty easy to conceptualize. I can do that in my head real quick. So let's see. 50 to 45. I know 45, that's a 90. So then this would be 44 to 40. This would be 39 to 30. And this would be 29 to 0. So I did that in my head real quick. Okay. Easy to do. But you shouldn't use categories worth 50, even though should be able to easily convert that into a percentage in your head. Why shouldn't you use categories worth 50 points? What's the problem now?
Half of the points are in one concept.
That is not necessarily a problem, because you could have lots of categories worth 50 points, and the whole thing might be 400 points total, and then you just take a percentage of the 400. So
Yeah.
it can get complicated there, but that's not the exact problem here.
Did we just run into the problem from earlier where half the class is failing?
No,
Okay.
because all of this, and this, that's all passing, right? This box, 39 to 30 out of 50. That's a
Okay.
C or D.
Gotcha.
The problem with this is that the human mind cannot slice things up in such small increments. So let's say you gave one student in this category, you gave them a 42 out of 50. And then another student, you gave them a 44 out of 50. And they both come up to you and they say, Mr. Semino, why did I get a 42 and he got a 44? What are you going to say? You'll probably not have a good answer for them. Or if one
Probably
student,
not.
One student got a 39 and one student got a 40. What's the difference between a 39 and a 40 at a 50? You can't slice it up like that in your mind. You can't know exactly what a 39 is versus a 40 out of 50. It's not really possible. So what you're doing is you're actually slapping on random grades, which you don't want to do. Okay. But in this case, I should be able to articulate the difference between a 7 out of 10 and an 8 out of 10, right? So a 7 out of 10 is clearly a C, and the student needs to make some improvements, but an 8 out of 10 is a much stronger paper. It's not perfect, but they mastered most of the stuff. So I should be able to articulate the difference between here and here if it's a 7 out of 10 versus an 8 out of 10. And the same thing with grades. If the category is worth 20% or 20 points, I should be able to articulate the difference up here. But when you have such small increments here, you're not going to be able to do that. Like, what's the difference between a 36 and a 37? There's no way that you're going to be able to have something in your mind like to say why one paper got a 36 and why one paper got a 37 out of 50. So again, while you can convert this easily into a percentage, this it's not you're not going to be successful in grading accurately if you do that. So I suggest only using categories worth 10 or 20 points. Now, if you look at the rubric for the key assessment that you turned in today or will turn in today, all the categories are worth 20 points. And if you look in each box, you will see this. That's how it's set up. So now what it does is it distinguishes better between that B plus and A minus, between the B minus and C plus, and there's fewer there's less room for students to land in this F column. Okay. Um, I would argue that if you use this type of grading structure, you're gonna be assigning more accurate grades to students. Not this type. Let's get that out of here. All right. So that required you to think about some math, but it should be math that you can mostly do in your head. At when you've scored all the categories, you'll have to get a calculator out because it might be out of 70 points or 80 points total, or 90. It doesn't matter what the total points are because at that point you're taking a percentage of everything. And if your words align with your letter grades and the numbers align with the letter grades, then you're good. Then, but let's see. Um, what if, what's the problem here? What if we did this? This is 9 and this is 8 to 6. That is incorrect, right? What's the problem there? The math in that rubric is now incorrect. Why is it incorrect?
The person who got the 9, that'd be 90% though out of 10. So that should be an A, but you're giving them a B.
Yeah, here you're describing B level work, but 9 out of 10 is not a B, right? 9 out of 10 is an A. And it also creates a problem here because here you're describing C level work, but an 8 out of 10 is not a C, it's a B. So the math now in this rubric is incorrect. Now it's back to being correct. Questions? Let's see. Morgan is puts a question in the chat. For the rubric that we have to make for the key assessment, will we run into the same problem of failing students basing on 1, 2, 2, 1, or 0? That is a very good question. However, what you have to keep in mind is that the rubric that you're making for the key assessment is not for a performance assessment. It's for a short answer question, right? So for a short answer question, you're not gonna use what's called an analytic rubric like this for a short answer question where you're giving them scores in all these different categories. This is an analytic rubric because it has scores in lots of different categories and it's for a major grade for a performance assessment. My Zoom shut off for a second. Are y'all still with me? Hello? Can y'all hear me? Hello?
Dr. Quayle, are you there?
Yes. So
Yes,
my
Dr.
Zoom,
Quayle.
Yeah, it's going in and out, and your video is going in and out as well.
Yeah, you're slowing down on us.
okay. Yeah, shut off for a second. Got a bad connection. Yes. Okay. Let's see.
We can hear you now.
Okay. All right. So I forgot where I was, or I don't know where it went off. But anyways, the question was about for the was it clear? Was my answer clear to Morgan's question about why this is different from the rubric you're creating for the key assessment for the short answer question? Did you get that?
That's when you start to slow down. Would you please repeat?
Okay. This is the rubric for a performance assessment for a summative project, for an essay, for a like a major performance assessment. What you're doing for the key assessment is for a short answer question on a test. For a short answer question on the test, you're not going to have an analytic rubric with all these categories. Okay, you're not going to grade. You can't spend so much time on a short answer question where you're having to grade it in a bunch of categories. You can't do that. So for your short answer question on the test, you're giving it full credit, half credit, or 0 credit. That's just a small portion of the grade the student is getting on that test, right? This is for a major summative performance assessment, like an essay, like a research paper, something like that. Okay. Is that clear? So what
Yes.
you need,
Yeah, we're just
what you need,
using that rubric for that constructed response.
yeah, you need to think about the purpose of the assignment of so that is a short answer rubric. This is for a major assignment, like an essay research paper. Okay. Um, Last thing I want to note about rubrics before we're going to spend 5 minutes after this just looking at the study guide. But one thing I want to note, most of you are going to be grading on grammar or conventions, even if you're for papers, even if you're not an language arts person, even if you're a history person, you do need to have a grade in there for grammar and things like that. What I will say, you should never count the number of errors. Okay. And this is going to sound like a riddle, so you guys have to figure it out. You shouldn't count the number of errors in a student's paper and have that in the rubric. Like for this category, 0 errors. For this column, 2 to 4 errors. For this column, 5 to 6 errors. Don't do that. When you do that, it penalizes students for something they shouldn't be penalized for, and it rewards other students for something that they shouldn't be rewarded for when you count the number of errors. So explain that.
What I can think of, Dr. Cuevas, is
Good.
perhaps just because a student can't write well or follow conventions, if they get the main theme correct, they would be okay. You'd be penalizing some for something they shouldn't be penalized for and rewarding others for something that they shouldn't be rewarded for.
Well, you're going to have another category in your rubric that goes towards the main idea. So if you just have a minor category in your rubric, that you're going to have a minor category in your rubric that deals with grammar, but you shouldn't count the number of errors. Okay, to speed it up, here's the answer. When you count the number of errors, it rewards students for writing short, simple papers. When you count the number of errors, it penalizes students for writing longer, more complex papers, because a longer, more complex paper is going to have more errors, right? So for instance, if you're just counting errors and one student writes a 2-page paper, they have 3 errors in it, in a 2-page paper. Another student writes a 5-page paper and they have 4 errors in that 5-page paper. They have more errors than the student who had the 2-page paper, but they get a lower grade according to your rubric because all you were doing was counting errors. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
So don't put the number of errors in your rubric. Just say the top column is few to no errors, none of which impede the reader's ability. You show strong mastery throughout of grammar with few to no errors, none of which impede the reader's ability to comprehend the paper. And then the next column down would be maybe some errors sporadically throughout the paper, none of which impede the reader's ability. And then the next column down, the CD, would be multiple errors throughout the paper, some of which impede the reader's ability to comprehend the paper. But don't count them. Don't count them because if you do count them, students won't try to use complex vocabulary because they don't want to misspell it, right? They won't try to use complex sentences because they don't want to get the sentences wrong. That you'll be training students to write the shortest, simplest thing they can, and you shouldn't be training students to do that, right? So you don't want to just count the number of errors, all right? That's the last thing that I want to talk about with rubrics. And so I'll stick around if anybody has any questions about rubrics after that. So now let's just go through the study guide for the final real quick, and then I'll let y'all go in about 10 minutes. So let's share the study guide. The study guide is now open in D2L, and here we go. So basically for this final exam, it will be next Wednesday. I will open it up in the morning. You will have all day to work on it. You will have to turn it in by midnight. If it is not turned in by midnight, that's it. You cannot turn it in after that. It's going to have mostly short answer, fill in the blank, multiple choice questions on it. After having graded your key assessments, I can't then be grading a bunch of essay questions and stuff like that. So all of the questions on the test are relatively short. Okay, it will be open book. So basically, you're going to have a Word document in there. You will open it. You will type into the Word document. You can use your notes. You can look back at the resources and readings throughout the course. It's open book, open note. What you cannot do is communicate with each other by text, by whatever, by phone, whatever. If you communicate with each other, then you are technically cheating. Do not do that. I think it's enough to give you a test that's open book, open note. You shouldn't have to go beyond that. I would think everyone should be able to complete this in about an hour. Some people um, who are very focused and very diligent, you want to double and triple check, it might take them an hour and a half or so. I don't think it should take you longer than that. Some people might be able to complete it in 45 minutes, but you have until midnight to turn it in. There are about 35 questions total. Some of them have multiple parts on there. There are two main parts um, for the final exam. So the first part is questions related to planning and assessment. So for instance, here are some of the topics that will be covered on that part. The qualities of well-written learning objectives. That should be like the back of your hand by now. Different forms of instruction that can be used in a lesson plan. So that might think about the procedures part of the lesson plan. Different levels of Bloom's taxonomy. There are only 6 levels. You should have those memorized by now, but also what does each one mean? What exactly does it mean? What exactly does analysis mean? What exactly does application mean? So you'll have to know those. Different forms of assessment and characteristics of them. So we've talked about like formative and summative assessment and things like that. And what are the weaknesses and strengths of these different forms of assessment? Benefits and limitations of multiple choice items compared to essay items or short answer constructed response items. So we talked about the multiple choice items have some benefits to teachers, and short answer constructed response also have some benefits, but they also have some weaknesses compared to one another. Interpretive exercises. So the text chapter talked about interpretive exercises with novel prompts and all that. You should know about that. The purpose and use of difficulty index and discrimination index. We talked about that, I guess, last week and the week before. Examples of performance assessments and benefits and limitations. That's what we've been talking about tonight. And then assessing cooperative learning. We talked about that last time. So those are some of the topics covered on that. Part 2 is a little bit different. Part 2, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you test items. They all have flaws in them. You have to identify the flaws. So basically, it's kind of almost like a short answer response. You don't have to respond in complete sentences. You shouldn't have to. You can just respond with a phrase like, here's what's wrong with this one. Here's what's wrong with this one. So these are not long responses. So there'll be some true or false items, all of which have problems. You have to identify what the problem is in those true false questions. There will be multiple choice items. You're not answering these items. You're just saying what the flaw is. The thinking is if you can identify the flaws in these items, you should in the future be able to identify similar flaws in your own test items and avoid those flaws. Okay. So there'll be true, false, multiple choice, matching, fill in the blank, short answer, and essay items, all of which have flaws. And some of them you might be able to identify the flaw in a single word or phrase, and that's perfectly fine as long as you identify the flaw. Then at the end, I'm going to give you a rubric. The rubric is going to have some flaws in it, similar to what we looked at tonight. You're going to ask to find 3 flaws in the rubric. Now, there might be 100 different things you can say about ways you would change the rubric, but I'll give partial credit on some of them. But if you miss the main flaws, then you do not get full credit for that. There are certain main flaws. Think about what we talked about tonight with math, with reliability, with validity. And if you can find those main flaws, that's where you're going to get full credit. If you just find minor flaws, which are like, they could improve it this way or that way, you'll get half credit for those. Okay. That is a rundown of the final exam. Again, it is next Wednesday. I will open it up in the morning. You will have until midnight to submit it. There will be a Dropbox for you to submit it to. Questions?
Dr. Cuevas, what percentage of our grade is the final for your class?
Well, let me see. I need to look at the syllabus for that. I think it's 10%. 10%.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. Cuevas, for our notes, should we, I put my notes on my Google Drive for the whole semester. I just add to them each week. Should I go ahead and print those out? Do you prefer them to be printed out while we're doing the open book?
No,
Okay.
I mean, it doesn't matter to me. I would advise folks not to Google stuff because if you just Google things, it you might get a very common answer, but it might not be specific or it might not be accurate enough for for my taste. So
Mhm.
just if sometimes people Google random stuff to try to answer a question, that's probably not going to cut it. It might not, but I can't keep you from doing that. But I would say make sure you're drawing upon the course material. You're more likely to get it right than if you just Google vague stuff. But as far as the notes you use, the resources available to you, you pretty much have everything available to you.
Yeah, I think that's why I was asking because in my master's program we couldn't open another tab, so we had to print out so that's what I was asking. I just wanted to make sure if I left it in Google Docs it'd be fine.
No,
But
this is pretty much done on your honor, and I feel like this is stuff everybody should know by now
yeah,
in the course. But if you have to look back at your notes or look back at the course materials, that's perfectly fine.
okay. Thank you.
Dr. Cuevas, you said a long time ago in your modules, if we study the lesson objectives from each of your modules, I wrote it down in my notes, we should be in good shape for your final.
Yes. Now,
Okay.
keep in mind that some of those objectives are not going to be assessed on the final because they were assessed on the performance assessment. So there's some things that are better assessed on the performance assessment, like this key assessment, but there are some things that you kind of need to. If they might be knowledge questions that you did need to devote to memory, like the levels of Bloom's taxonomy. You should kind of know those by now. But yeah, I think a good way to study would be to go through the objectives for each week and see if you can answer those or if you can do those things without having to look back at your notes, then you're probably in good shape. That would be a good way to study. The basically the content is going to very much align with those weekly objectives.
So it's a valid test.
I would hope so.
Is there a study guide we can download?
It's the one we just looked at. It's in module 9. It's right after. So tonight we looked at Sophia's essay. We looked at the math rubric, which is a bad rubric. And right below that, you will find the study guide.
Okay, thank you, Doctor.
Okay. All right, I'm going to stick around. I'm not hearing a lot of questions. So if you don't have any more questions about rubrics or about the final exam, then you can go. I probably will not see you again like this. I will see you, be in touch next semester. Uh, but I'll stick around in case anybody has more questions. If not, then it's been good working with you. I'll have the grades up for everything next week. And then I will see you again, be in touch with you again next semester for that reading course.
So Dr. Cuevas, what do we have you for next semester and when does that semester start?
There's a course called Reading Across the Content Areas. So what you learn to do in that course is you learn to basically take your course material, whether it's a history course or science or whatever, and have students learn how to read that material. Um, that's and as far as when it starts, I don't even want to think about that because yeah, look, it's in the course calendar. I think it's I don't know, first or second week in August. That like I'm still grading this semester stuff, and they're sending us information about next semester and like syllabi and stuff like that. And it's just like I'm having to rack my brain to get done with this stuff. But anyways, it's in a few weeks. You can look on the course calendars. Um,
Well,
hopefully
my
that
understanding is we're all going to be teacher candidates heading off to our field placement. In the orientation last night, they said that doesn't begin for us until August 11th. So is it sometime
Hey,
after
Shay,
August? Yes.
let me.
the semester starts August 11th.
Yeah, that
Oh,
sounds about right.
I
Let
didn't know that. Okay.
let me look at them. If I go to the quick links, it's got calendars, uh, academic calendar, fall semester. Yeah, August 11th. So we got 4 weeks.
Okay. All right. Well, I just wanted to say, Dr. Quayla,